Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. We are going to jump into our final series or final episodes, final hour. I don't want to say
Yeah.
power hour. That's a whole different thing. If you're just joining us, welcome back to AWS On Air. Today, we are talking about what's new with Amazon Aurora. I am Aaron Hunter. I'm a senior technical trainer with AWS training and certification. And with me, we have on my left,
I am Brian. I'm a senior developer advocate on the CloudFormation team and super excited to get this session started.
awesome. And with us, we have joining pretty soon, Bachar.
Hello.
Wow, Bashar. I love the chandelier. That's
Oh,
awesome.
oh. I was gonna say the paint color. Brian, you got like a dark
You
theme
know,
going on.
it's
Bachar is
always
bright.
it's always popular that pink color, right? So I tried with different places, and I always try to attract people with that pink colors. I know. Yeah,
Is it pink? It looks more like
it is
maroon.
actually no, it's not pink. It's red.
Is it red? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
If you had to pinpoint like the exact shade of red, what was it?
I don't know. It's dark red. Is it not clear? You want me to turn on the chandeliers?
No.
It's dark red. My house, and that is how I bought the house. It's each, which it makes it very difficult if you want to refresh the paint. Each room is painted in a different color. We have like 5 or 6 different shades of green that
Ah, okay.
range from really light green all the way to like pistachio or dark green. Makes it very hard when
Ooh.
you want to go, or if one of the kids just punch the walls or try to write on the walls, which they all happen, right? It makes it hard to go and refresh the paint. Yeah.
It does. And red is like one of the hardest colors to cover. I don't know why. What's going on with that?
It is. It is. The good thing is the old owner of the house, they were very methodical and they left the numbers of the paint, which I found the
Ooh.
numbers 10 years later. I've been in my house 18 years. I found it in one of the cabinets like 10 years later. So I was
Really
able
good
to
for
get, yeah,
touch-ups.
I know. It really helped.
We're not here to talk about paint, are we? We're
Yeah,
here to
well, we
talk
can,
about
Yeah.
but let's talk about Aurora, right?
all right, so what are we here for, Bachar, if you don't mind?
All right, so we have Wesley as well. Is Wesley on?
Wesley, yes, Wesley, get
Can
ready.
we
You're
add
coming
Wesley
in.
as well?
3, 2,
Yeah,
and
jump
1.
on. All
I
right.
feel left out that I couldn't discuss
Oh, I'm so
and
sorry.
give
Get
the
ready
shot
about the
some
paint
So
too.
grief for his paint colors.
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks. I'm sure the guys probably had a earful of Aura, so we're gonna wrap the day. And I guess with the last session, we have all the time that we need, right? So we can just go over and we can talk about how to leverage partners. How do you engage partner in your migration and your opportunities? My name is Bashar Rifai. I'm a senior partner solution architect. Um, I work with partners only on different engagement. My specialty is SQL Server and Babelfish. And for those who don't know Babelfish, we will probably cover that in one of the slides. But with me, I have Wesley Chang. I will let him introduce himself. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, Wesley Chung. I work with partners as well, focused on the database services. Bashar and I have run into each other quite a bit this year, working with some of our key partners. So I'm excited to be here to talk about, one, why does AWS even have a partner ecosystem, and how can you as a customer of ours benefit from our partner strategy?
Very good.
So
Awesome.
did I
Thank
go
you.
ahead and kick it off here?
Yeah, let's do it.
We're gonna cover a few things. We have a number of ways in which you can measure and determine which partners might be right for you, and I'm going to cover some of that and then conclude my portion of the agenda with some success stories, so you can get a sense for how partners have helped specific customers. And then I'll turn it back over to Bashar, who will walk you through this idea of running proofs of concept and leveraging partners for those types of activities. So Bashar, you can move on to the next slide. So we have something that we call APN. It's the AWS Partner Network. And the thing for you to take away from this is it's your mechanism to find partners who have the right skills and the right expertise to make you successful. And there's a link there on this slide. You can also go to AWS and .amazon.com/partners and find this same resource. But it's basically a search engine to scour the catalog and inventory of all of the partners that work with us. And for Aurora and database specialties, you'll learn more about how we measure some of those capabilities. We believe that partners bring a level of expertise and experience in the market that we can't build ourselves. And so that's why partners are so essential to our business. And when you're working with us, we try to make it as easy and seamless as possible for you to find the right partner to engage in your projects and your initiatives. If you're ever in doubt and you don't want to necessarily search the site yourself, you can also just work with your account managers. Bashar and I get requests all the time from account managers who say, hey, my customer wants to do X, Y, and Z. Who can you recommend? Who's done this type of project before? So you can move to the next slide, Bashar. All right, so this is a broad overview of the APN category system. And for this conversation, I'm going to mainly focus on this middle path, partners who focus on delivering either consulting, professional services, they help you manage your databases, and maybe add some value on top of the AWS services that we offer. And so that middle path is what we call the services path. Some of you who've worked with us in the past may be familiar with this as the consulting path. And we also have partners who, they're not necessarily restricted to any one of these swim lanes. Some partners are services path partners where they do professional services and consulting, but they also have software products that they sell. And so they might be a technology partner that builds software products on top of AWS capabilities. But if you're looking for help in actually running your projects or getting advice on how to run your projects, that services path is the type of partner you should be looking for. Next slide. So this is just one of those, we have a lot of partners. You can see by the volume, even dating back to 2017, we were constantly adding partners. We've grown this number even significantly more. And the main takeaway here is that no matter where you are in the world, you'll be able to find partners who have the right skills. And if you're working on an area of maybe a newer capability like Babelfish, Bashar and my teams will get involved to make sure those partners are successful. So there's always a backstop of AWS expertise to make sure those partners are can be trusted to take your projects forward. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about two things next. One is the AWS competency program, and the second one is the service delivery validation program. These are basically two ways in which you can look through our partner catalog and determine whether the partner has the right skills and expertise to assist you in your projects. So the competency program is sort of a validation or a check mark that the partner has done some level of work in enablement and in demonstrating customer success around a specific workload or an industry or a use case. And so two that may be relevant for your Aurora projects will be the migration competency and the data and analytics competency, because they both overlap with use cases where you might bring Aurora into the bill of materials or the services you'll use for your project. So first thing you should look for, partners with a migration competency or a data and analytics competency. Next slide. And then we have partner service delivery program, which, as the slide sort of indicates, is that validation program that the partner has specialty or expertise in that specific AWS service. So in this case, you want to look for a partner who has Aurora expertise. Next slide. So I'm going to cover two customer success stories, and then I'll turn it over to Bashar, just to give you a flavor for sort of the types of projects and work that our partners deliver. And one thing to remember in terms of these timeframes that you'll see on this slide and the next slide, 10 months and then 6 months on the next one, were much compressed because the customer ended up choosing a partner. If the customer had chose to go it alone and use their own resources, which might have been sort of overstaffed or overwhelmed, then those customers would have struggled to deliver these projects in any reasonable amount of time frame. But because they brought partners into the fold, they were able to realize business outcomes and business benefits much sooner. So Acoustic builds marketing products. They have a marketing cloud, and they were in the process of trying to basically modernize away from a bunch of legacy infrastructure that was managed across more than 6,000 servers. So they brought in ClearScale, and ClearScale is one of our premier consulting partners with 11 AWS competencies and 9 service validations. And they were able to not just move their workloads over to AWS, but actually re-architected and redesigned one of the main applications that Acoustic offers to the market so that it would leverage Aurora. And by doing so, they were able to do a number of things, including reducing licensing fees, which I'm sure you've heard a bunch today about the benefits of why you move away from some of the commercial database vendors and onto a platform like Aurora. Next slide. Similarly, Trimble builds software and technology for industrial companies and customers, like in the agricultural space. They wanted to move off of a privately hosted infrastructure to AWS, and as part of that, they realized that a number of their Oracle databases would benefit from removing the Oracle dependency and moving over to Aurora. And so Trimble worked with Annika, and Annika was able to do a number of things. And by looking at not just moving those workloads in sort of a lift and shift fashion, they were able to actually optimize performance and licensing obligations. So you can see there that they reduced the page load time by 28%. They were also able to improve application reliability because the database was not always in as much contention. So when you have the opportunity to let's say investigate, assess, and introspect into your application workloads for those opportunities around improving the database aspects, you can realize more benefits than just simple cost of management. So I'll turn it back over to Bashar.
One more slide.
Oh, yeah. So this is just a slide that we'd like to show to our partners, right? Because many of you may be thinking about a business use case, a project, an outcome. What is really happening under the covers, though, is they all are dependent on your database decisions, your database architectures, and without thinking about the database implications, you're never going to make progress on some of these initiatives. So no matter where you are in the business, whether you're on the business side or on the IT side, or whether you're focusing on a customer experience use case or a back office use case, database is going to be critical in those conversations.
I like how Bashar said, nope, not me yet.
Yeah, one more slide. Thank you, Wesley. That was very good. I appreciate it. All right, guys. So just like as Wesley walk us through, how do we pick a partner and what criteria do we use to pick a partner and help us? I mean, the statistics that we have and the data that we have, we have seen that an opportunity is really accelerated when partners involved, and especially with partners that brings a lot of expertise when it comes to the specific product, service, or the technology. Right, a lot of customers that we work with, or partners that we work with, they told us that some of the customers, they may or may not have the existing knowledge, especially when they are coming from commercial database like Oracle or SQL Server. A lot of shops, and I know like some of you probably will know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of shops that they just totally SQL Server, for example, .NET, right? They don't know Postgres. They're not familiar with Postgres, and they want to migrate to Aurora Postgres, right? So that's where the partner's capability comes in, and it does help. But it's very important to understand why Amazon Aurora and why we need to do a proof of concept. Uh, so first and foremost is why customer choose Aurora. Probably you've seen this before, or you've seen some of this information. I'm just gonna go quickly through this information. We're gonna spend more time on the different type of proof of concept and different type of testing. But AWS, just like any other service, we always work backward from the customers, and we always have what the customers need, right? So we have a lot of different offerings when it comes to databases. We have the RDS, we have Aurora, and even on RDS itself, we have uh, 14, 15. I think we have 13 purpose-built database that range from the NoSQL. We have the commercial database, the RDS, Oracle, and SQL Server. We have the MySQL, Postgres, and MariaDB. But really, I mean, RDS as an open source or as a commercial, and Aurora is two different products. Aurora is a very strong and rich product when it comes to the cloud native, right? So the comparison is, if some people, they do choose to go to RDS, but some other customers who would want to leverage the might of AWS. They decided to go to Aurora for the different features that my colleagues they talked to through for the last 3 hours, right? The scalabilities, the fault tolerance, the high availability is that Aurora, the self-healing storage, the enterprise grade, the global database, backtracking, and all the different features, right? And I did mention Babelfish as well, and that's a new offering that we had that came out in last reInvent, which I'm not sure if you guys know what Babelfish is, but it's quickly what Babelfish is allows secret SQL Server databases to natively connect and work on Aurora Postgres with minimal conversion. Uh, Aurora Postgres, if you enable Aurora Postgres with Babelfish options, it will create a new connection or new T-SQL connection that will allow your .NET applications to connect to Aurora Postgres. So that will minimize your migration by at least 80%. Yes, there's some features that are not available right now, but we are building these capabilities, and there's a lot of interest around the Babelfish. So that's something probably you guys need to look into. But that's where the partners comes in and does help you, because it's a new feature, and it's we're trying to educate our partners and educate our customers around Babelfish, and those partners they always come to us if they are have a blockers or us, and that's how the relationship between us and the partners works. So some of the customers they actually are on Amazon Aura right now. I'm not going to go through all that. Of course, in the middle is Amazon. Amazon, at one time, they had the biggest and largest Oracle database. That Oracle database has been broken down into multiple and went into multiple different services. One of them is Amazon Aurora. Um, of course, you've got DynamoDB, Redshifts, and different pieces. It depends on what kind of application or what kind of piece of the database. But at some point, it was the biggest database, and then went to Amazon or Verizon, Samsung, Dow Jones, or Rainier. Those are great examples of uh, customers they chose to come from commercial, from open source to our Aurora. So when should you do a proof of concept, and why you need to do a proof of concept? So proof of concept is very important, and we go through a proof of concept even when we are on-prem, even when even if we don't have to go through a migration or cloud migration. When you are shifting hardware, proof of concept is always important, because you want to understand uh, if your application is going to work on that piece of hardware or technologies, not to mention that you are actually changing the whole topologies of your applications, right? So re-platforming, modernizing, and migrating to AWS, right? That does require, from our perspective, a POC. What is re-platforming? You probably heard that a lot, but we always use those different terms like rehosting, re-platforming, refactoring. Rehosting is simply when you move from on-prem to what we call an EC2, like lift and shift. That's what we call the rehosting. Uh, Replatforming is when you move from on-prem or EC2 to our managed service, to RDS. Remodernization or refactoring is like when you start really leveraging the cloud native services and you start breaking your monolithic application into microservices. That's what we call modernization, or uh, uh, I forgot the word I just mentioned, remodernize or replatform. So anytime you go through this journey, a POC is definitely required. It's highly required because you want to make sure that your application continue to perform as it was performing on-prem. As I said, why? Evaluate the purpose, ensure the operations requirements are met, engage the level of effort, and that's important. You want to gauge and document the level of effort that is needed to reach the goal, whether you can do it with a certain amount of time that you have, or you need to maybe engage somebody, and that's when the partner comes in and does help you with that effort as well. So how do you structure a proof of concept? So this is what we call in the discovery phase, right? So you're not in a proof of concept, you're just trying to discover, right? And you start with working with the structuring your POC and defining your objective. You review and define your, for example, your scaling requirements, your limitation, your metrics, your latency, your IOs, and what would you like you see what's good to have and what's nice to have. And we're going to look at those in a little bit more details in the next few slides when we look at the different type of testing. But it's very important here to set your expectation. What is exactly I want to get out of that POC, right? And quantify that and have a baseline, right? You don't just go and that will partner will help you through that. But it's very important because you know the application. You as a customer, you know your application, you know your database, you know your performance. The partner will help you get this information, but you have to help the partner as well, tell them that's exactly your expectation, right? So baseline, baseline, baseline. That is very important to have a baseline on-prem, and so you can use that to match your POC and kind of determine whether it's a successful or you need to do something on the cloud or during that POC. And do take a baseline throughout the different time, right? So not just one baseline. You need a baseline during the peak, the average, the weekends. You want to capture all different workloads. So you need to identify the workload and the characteristics of that workload, right? So always you want to run production like workload when it comes to POC. Right, it's very important. It's very important to understand that things will change. You don't want to run a development like or QA like in POC and compare it to production. You're taking baseline from production. You want to write as much as you can. We know it's difficult. It could be difficult to mimic the client connections or the client interaction or how client interact, but it's always good to have as close as possible a representative of the workload, right? And understand your database, right? Is it OLTP? Is it OLAP or HTAP, right? And HTAP is something that is actually, I don't know if you've heard of the HTAP, but it's a hybrid technology with the analytics, right? It's something that's probably start evolving and start being the norm maybe in the last 5, 6, 7 years, right? So you've got the OLAP, which is your analytics, the cubes or the analytics. You've got the transactional processing, and you've got the edge tab, which is a hybrid of transactions and analytics. Right, so it's not like either or; it could be hybrid. So, but I understand what your application is, right, and then you can determine what works where and how you're gonna approach that POC. The understand your concurrency levels, how many clients are connecting, what is your peak, how many you expecting at the high, at the low, right? So those are very important to get a successful POC. What's your data size going to look like? What's your POC data size going to start with? Is it exactly like production? Some of the customers, they choose to have a subset of the database, and that's good as a beginning to get an understanding. And with a different type of testing, and we're going to look at the different type of testing, maybe you can consider different type of data setting, right? Maybe you're getting started, you understand the AWS how it works, you start with a small set just to get a proof of concept. But eventually, if you want to sign off, you need to test on the work, just like what we said, a production like workload. Defining and rank your success criteria. So you want to do a POC, you set up your expectation, all that. It's important to set up your success criteria. It's important to understand what you're expecting and what is good to have and what is nice to have, right? It's nice to have an application that perform 10 times faster, but what is it that I need now right now, right? So most of the customers, they need to have a similar performance as on-prem, and they can work from there, right? A lot of customers, they do get better performance. It depends on the application. It depends where they're going and how they approach that migration. But it's good to set up those criterias and understand what you need and what is a success test and what is a failure, right? In this methodology here that we're presenting, and there's a sample at the end of this presentation that you guys can take and use, right? It's very important to have something methodical and go from what we're saying from something that says, well, it's 2 times slower, but rather than go with, let's say, okay, well, the reporting performance is number 2, right? And you define what 1, 2, and 3, and do have a scorecard. And that's the scorecard you use eventually to just kind of determine which one is the one that I'm gonna work on, which one is It's okay to have as a day one, so you can determine that, and you can use that as a scorecard as the way to move forward. So how do you set up your database environment setup? And that's something that it could be a combination of your partner, but partners usually do that work because they do have the expertise. As like Wesley walk us through that, some of them they do have those competencies, and they've done that, and they can help you with that, and they're a lot quicker in setting up your database and your POC. A few things that we need to pay attention to when we are moving to Aurora is that some of the key differences between your on-prem and Aurora. And I'm not going to go into details, but I'm going to mention a few things because it's important to understand those as part of the POC. My colleagues that went through the Aurora storage, the Aurora compute, the resiliency, and all that in depth and details. But you do have to set up an environment. So this it's very important. It's similar as much as you get into your on-prem. If you have high availabilities, set up high availabilities because with that there's a latency for the synchronization. Aurora storage is not as much as the on-prem. If you look at the bottom two screens, right, the one on the left is what we think it looks like is on-prem. The one on the right is Aurora storage, right? So the on-prem, let's say for example, the R is your read, P is your primary, S is your secondary, and you've got those are spread into three different data centers. For example, this one and this two are synchronized, right? And the read replica gets from the primary as opposed to the Aurora, which is on your right side. Things are a little different when it comes to the synchronization, the storage. It's by default split up into 6 different copies, 3 different AZs, so you don't have to do anything. So that's by there is an advantage. So do understand those as you're doing your PSC, as you're setting your criteria, as you're setting your success. So there's already an advantage in terms of the synchronization and improvement in latency when it comes to synchronizing the different pieces of the write and read. So do understand that you use read replica. If you're using read replica on-prem, use that read replica. And if you again, and if your application allow that, so set up your baseline, compare to baseline, and you can improve from that. But if you don't have a read replica, don't use read replica at the beginning. Make sure your baseline, make sure your POC is equivalent to what's on-prem, and then you can start improving on your applications. And again, partners is heavily involved in the setup. Are they have the expertise to do that? They do help. They do have the, for example, they do have the cloud formation, which can automate the deployment. They can do that quickly, so they don't have to go through manual setup. So partners are enabled, and they have all that information at their hand. So some of the suggested database metrics and statistics, and again, for customers, they've done that. They know all this. This is not just Aurora. Some of those are Postgres, and some of them are specific to Aurora, which I'm not going to spend a lot of times. Uh, I've heard some of my colleagues they went deep into uh, those details, but just in general, right? In Aurora, as we said, Aurora um, Postgres or MySQL is a native, is a cloud. It does have all the different pieces of monitoring at the fingertip. So do take advantage of those as you're doing your POC, as you're testing, as you're comparing CloudWatch metrics, use CloudWatch metrics, use enhanced monitoring, which gives you access to operating system and it gives you access to operating system metrics. Uh, Pay attention to your intervals. Do change it to 5 so you can get better look at how things are changing as of 5 seconds on a better scale. Do enable performance insights, and the performance insight will give you enough and good information on how your database is performing. Right, you will see some differences between on-prem and AWS. You're gonna see things that are gonna perform much better, and there's queries that can perform little worse on prem. So that's why you have to start adjusting. Hardware is different, computation is different, IO is different. So you might need to adjust some stuff. I say may with 2 lines under may because some customers they just didn't see any differences. They saw better performance. Some customers they have noticed that okay, well I need to change some of the queries and some of the indexes or statistics. Do enable the page state statement and auto explain extension for Aura Postgres. Will give you a good insight into how your execution works and your statement and your query plans. Enable query plan management. This is Aurora Postgres is very important. The query plan management, it give you it kind of like give you the how the plans are being managed. It's good to have that turned on, and it gives you good visibilities to the planning. For MySQL, of course, the low query and performance schema needs to be. Oh, it's good to have those enabled. And some of those, as I said, partners, they have those, and they have those as part of their migration and POCs documentation. So they do that by default. Some of the best practices for running POC. Uh, if you guys are not familiar with AWS, our products or our database all have parameter groups. Because of the managed service capabilities, you do not have access sometimes to the operating system, so you change things, you parameter group. So do use that, and have, if you are running multiple POCs, have multiple different parameter groups, so you can differentiate what you changed on which environment or which database. As we talked about, simulated production architecture and a production test. Uh, it's always a good idea to just come as close as possible to production. Run tests on a period of time that is representative to your production. What does that mean is if you see you peak in the morning or in the afternoon, if you have loads that runs on the weekend, reports are on at the end of the month, you need to pick all this and run them. You don't want to miss any of this stuff to have a good and successful POC. Um, And the last but not least, we talked about it multiple times, same database set for a good POC and a reliable metrics, right? Always use similar size. So what's the type of the POC testing? Let's look at the different testing, and those could be uh, things that can be done by you guys as a customer, or combination with a partner, or could be done by a partner, right? We've seen both, and it depends on the expertise of the customers, but definitely our partners, they do have that expertise and they do it on their own, but they do need an input from the customers. It depends on the type of the testing. The major two quadrants of those testing are the functional and operationals, right? And those are the two broad arrays, right? And those are the where most of the testings that we've seen, right? With the functional testing being the capability test, performance tests, and scalability tests. And those are by far the most important ones that we've seen customers and partners focus on before they can declare, okay, it's a successful POC, we can move on to the operations and make sure it is compatible end to end. But without getting a successful functional, we cannot really look at operations, and we cannot consider operation. Operational being the resiliency test, security, backup, monitoring, and migration test. So let's look at each one and what does that mean and what does it the test entitle, right? So for capability test, right, it's one of the most important part of testing. Um, and it's almost a requirement in a POC, testing your entire application end to end. This is very important because we need to understand that, and we need to certify that this application is running with all the module, all the functions end to end in a new environment and in new technologies, right? Uh, you can, during that test, find a new opportunity to improve. We do not recommend you making any improvement until you just certify that this whole application is running. You leave the improvement toward the end. Once you certify it, once you've tested, once you make sure that it's a successful POC, you can start working on some improvement. But you just identify those opportunities, put them down, record those, document them, and leave them until the end. That's when you come in and now you start doing improvement. All right. Some of the best practices is on large applications, do break it into module and test one module at a time and certify one module at a time. It makes your life a lot easier and the partner as well. I mean, this is when it comes to the capability test is more of a customer because he knows the application. The partner can help with a few pieces, but this is mostly relies on the customer. He's the one who knows the application, knows how it's being used, and those are the one who's going to determine what is working and what's broken and what needs to be fixed. And as I mentioned, full application, all scenarios, the day, week, month, quarter, don't leave anything, even if it reports that you think is going on every 6 months, do test that. It's very important, especially when you're doing replatforming, as I said, or remodernization. You're changing technology. The performance test, it's one of the most and commonly tested in a POC. That's the one that makes or breaks, right? That's where when you get to the same performance, that's where you make things a lot easier. What comes, everything that comes after that. But that's the most important one. That's where the customers spend most of their time, and partners as well, is on the performance testing, right? And this test is pretty much to validate that your application performance SLA with normal and peak application load, right? Uh, you do have to validate, all the different pieces of your application, the different load profiles. And what we mean by that is uh, don't run like just few things. You need to really, as we said, capture the production load, right? If you run a huge report, million records that generates, do that and record the timing and try to match it with your baseline, right? The ensure it consists of the performance. It just consistently perform on the same level as your SLAs. Application role profiling, right? So it goes through the different metrics and specific hardware and architectures, right? So you want to test all that. And as a best practice, if a lot of things that goes into determining your performance, right, or how the performance works, not just database, right? Everything that works around the database does have an input on that, right? The number of clients that connects, right? The hardware. Do you have SSL, load balancer, firewalls, and I'm talking on on-prem, right? If you have all those on on-prem, you want to make sure that you have those enabled and created, and the partners again will do that and will have that migration playbook. They have the questionnaire. Usually they go and they run a questionnaire to determine what you have, but it's very important to understand as a customer what is the needed to be tested, what needs to be created to get a good performance test. uh, and one of the good practices, especially when it comes to Aurora Postgres, is considered Aurora Cluster Cache Management. And that's, if you don't know what that is, that does help with the failover and the caching of the replicas. And minimize the warm up when the replicas comes up. Parallel queries are as well for MySQL, and we do mention those, and those are something that you can take advantage of to optimize your performance, to improve your performance, but they may not be needed at the beginning to get a good baseline. A scalability test. The scalability test is it's the third in the functional test. It's not as high on the list comparing to the functional or comparing to the performance, right? But it's a good test to make sure that your database as it's in cloud, it does perform well by scaling, different workloads, right? Aurora database, you know how it works, and you by now you know how the scaling works and how the storage works, right? All that, right? But it's good to understand whether the Aurora does handle your changes to your application workload, right? And you can take advantage of our auto scaling, our read replicas if your use case allow that, and you can determine the different workload that does trigger auto scaling. And that's a good test, but usually it's on the bottom of the testing when it comes to a proof of concept, right? Because they want to determine first whether the application is certified, is working, is not broken, and it perform as well as the on-prem. Resiliency test. So that we shifted from the functional to the operational. So at this point, you guys have certified or you're working on the performance, but you started shifting to some of the other testing as well. So resilience says the database performance is an important, as we said, is a very important. But honestly, it is useless if you don't have a good resilience test, or if your database goes down or fails and you don't have a good procedure to deal with that, right? Before we mention and we talk about, and you've heard about Amazon Aurora and how does it handle the fault tolerance and all that, but it's always good to have a good failure documentation, right? So you probably heard about the chaos engineers, right? And how do you engineer chaos and see whether your application does handle a good chaos or not? So it's always a good idea. It's actually, if you are a DBA, Actually, you do not grow as a DBA before you're going through multiple failures, and before you go and and try to find your database or your database backup, and you find out that you don't have one. That's part of the training as a DBA, right? I've been through that, and I'm sure a lot of people have been through that. So it's always good to have
Or
a
if you
test,
have your
and
backup and then you try to restore it and it doesn't work.
it doesn't work. Oh my God, I have been there before. Yes, it's bad when you are become complacent and you think that your backup works. And as a DBA, we always know that rules, right? Take your backup and test your backup every few months. But things are a lot easier and a lot better in Amazon. We take that's a managed service. We take all of that for you, right? But we cannot take care of how your application handle failures, right? You need to take care of that, and you need to handle that. We will ensure your hardware, your database, your backups, your all that is working and it's available, and we do have a good SLA for that. But does your application is actually resilient? That's something you need to test and need to make sure. So one of the important part of this test is test your application behavior during the database failures. Trigger a failure. All right, you have replica, you have secondaries. Go ahead and trigger a failure and see how your application handled it. How long does it take to come back up? How long is the outage? Are you missing any transactions? Does it connect? Does it not connect? And all that. Take advantage of that. uh, and record it as well. So just take a note and compare to that how it works in the POC and on-prem, and identify the process for auto remediation. Right? If you just you're shifting from how it works, you just identify those, document those, and make part of your documentation or your failure documentation. Right? So when it fails, you have that documented over the timing, so you can refer to that. Some of the best practices is use Amazon Aura fault injection queries. So we have some queries as well. You probably heard of the injection queries and how do you. So there's a lot of documentation. How do you handle those?
It's like chaos
Unlike
testing, right?
chaos testing, yes, it's actually wild, man. The chaos testing. I've been into multiple training chaos testing. It's just wild how things happens.
Yeah, it
Uh,
really helps with this resiliency test to make sure that the database is structured in a way where you can recover from failure.
Exactly, exactly, and that's very, very important. As I said, most of the companies, there's actually a lot of companies, and that's actually you can research that they do not. If they lose their database, they just go bankrupt. They cannot recover from a database failure, or no backup. Right? That is detrimental. Your data is everything, right? And as a DBA or few DBAs on the call, they understand what that means. For us, it's always important to have that backup and test the backup and make sure the data is protected. Um, as I said, just trigger a failover, review the client-side DNS endpoint caching configuration, and that determine how long that flip that takes from one server to the other. Because once you fail over, there's a DNS flip, and so record that and make sure that takes time. And there may be some optimization you need to do. Uh, and if your use case allowed, use the proxy, RDS proxy. There was a question about RDS proxy. Uh, I think the 2 sessions before my session, and I'm not the expert RDS proxy, but how does it help here? And Aurora RDS proxy actually will uh, improve your failure or the recovery of the failure. So the RDS proxy, the way it works, and I'm not going to go into details, but the way it works is it handles the connection, the client connection, right? If you have a lot of connections that exhaust your database, you can use RDS proxy and does minimize the amount of pressure on your database and move it to RDS proxy. And we've seen that it helps with the scalability and resiliency. But in a failure, it actually improved the failure with 60%. For the German who asked about Lambda, that's exactly the same thing how it works with Lambda. If the Lambda triggers a lot of connections using RDS proxy in the middle, it does help with minimizing the performance or the client exhaustion or the connection exhaustion on the database.
Yeah, it helps because it makes your database more scalable and resilient.
That's absolutely true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Security and access. So we're going down on the list, and now we start getting on the stuff that it is important. Security is, for AWS is always it's always job one or job zero. It's important, but as I said, this is after you determine everything is working, right? But this is the good timing where you start figuring out exactly what your security looks like, what your firewall looks like, who need access to what, right? And a lot of times without an exception, a lot of times we find out that people have access that they don't need access. That's the time when you start determining who needs what, because you're going through an overall of your application, right? That's the time when you start taking privileges, changing privileges, controlling your access, right? Use IAM to manage your AWS database, right? So do the password rotation, do all this in the best practices, but do have a good documentation of who needs access to what, and have that documentation in your hand. So you have a document who has access to what, and you start taking things out. If you don't need access, you don't need access. If you've had access at some point but you're not using it or you won't be using it, just take it out and have users to come and ask for permission. But that's the time where you can start tidying up your database and your security. Backup, recovery, and DR test. We touched this on the resiliency, right? But backup recovery, it's very important. It's AWS does make your life easier, but you do need to understand from the customer perspective, and that's really rely on the customer as more of a partner, because a partner cannot tell you what your recovery is going to look like. He can't tell you what your DR. It depends on your SLAs, right? It depends on the application and your requirement. He can work with you, but you need to define those, right? So you do need to understand your database backup and recovery procedures. Right? How do you recover? How long does it take? Whether your application allow 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours, 4 hour SLAs to come back up if you need to recover, right? This is all when we talk on on-prem, but things it's a lot different. You get the cloning, the fast cloning, and all that in Amazon Aurora. So the picture is changing, but it's good to have your SLAs, right? If your SLAs, let's say, oh, it's 2 hours, but you can get it in 5 minutes, that's good. Good is for you, but at least know what your SLAs is and document those. Configure your backup retention. Um, as you per SLAs, right? And define your test. And do test those. Please do test your disaster recovery procedures, right? Understand where you need your database. Do you need across regions? Do you need multi regions? Is it just same region, different AZs? As we said, Amazon Aurora is fault tolerance, and it does perform. I mean, you don't even notice that whether an AZ went offline. It's spread across 3 different AZs, 6 different copies. So it's by default is highly available, scalable, and resilient. But again, as I said, you need to test for all those different scenarios.
Yeah, and you
Set up an
mentioned testing, which is like critical. I mean, we talked about how you can back up your databases, but if you can't restore from that backup, do you
then
really
you
have a
that's
backup?
not a, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Then how
Performing
important is
game
that
day
back?
exercises is like critical.
Yep. Yeah, and not just that. I mean, understand what your backup looks like and what your data looks like and what you need and how far you want to go back and whether you how your PITR works and all that. So do have plan prepared. If somebody by mistake he deleted something, right? He's gonna come running at you and say, "Hey, I deleted a record." So you understand your PITR, understand how you're gonna roll back, and the difference between the on-prem and difference between Aurora and the cloud, and how we recover an instance or recover a database and all that. Do have all that documented, right? And define the test and the logical database. How do you want to, like, for example, table level backup, right, rather than a whole instance backup. So all those need to define your RTO and your RPO, right? Do you want to use Aurora Global Database? Do you want to use just a snapshot copy, fast cloning or cloning, right? All those needs to be documented, right? You do not want to sit down and start figuring out this stuff in the middle of a crisis. Your management is just not going to wait for you, right? And again, that's, as we said, full dry run. Always. I mean, create problem and try to fix it and see how quickly it can be fixed in AWS. This is not something, and I'll keep saying, this is not something the partner will be able to help a lot. He can help you with the setup, but that's something you need to define as a customer and you need to document. Moving on, the monitoring testing, right? AWS is rich when it comes to monitoring. We give you all kind of monitoring at all different levels, right? We do have the CloudWatch metrics. We do have the performance insight, and we looked at the difference, and I think you know what it is. And we have the enhanced monitoring. There's one that looks deep into the operating system metrics, and one looks at your database. So understand what those are, work with them, play with them, set up notification, understand what you want to see, what is important, what is you want to get as far as notification, what is okay to have, what is something you want to work on later, right? So some of the stuff that you might want to check is space, for example. Is it scaling? Is auto scaling? Do you CPUs, your memory? The stuff that you usually monitor on-prem, but on-prem you have to set up manually. Here it's all just a click of a button and it comes out of the box as opposed to buying a license and all that, right? And Amazon Aurora is a more uh, flexible when it comes to do that, right? So as a best practice, do set up your CloudWatch alarm for the key performance indicators: memory, CPUs, storage, IOPS, and all that. So be on top of your application, be on top of your database, and understand what that means. This is a key, and partners can help a lot with that because they do have those already set up. They do have it created, and we work with a lot of partners. They have those already documented and ready to go. So this particular test partner can help a lot, and he can just probably set up all that for you so you can take advantage of what's, and you have something outside the box that definitely you can set up yourself. As I said, the performance inside, the enhanced monitoring for additional orders, that's important. Um, and the iOS, right? So Aurora, when it comes to Amazon Aurora, iOS plays a big role in the performance. So be on top of that iOS, understand what the iOS look like, and get some alerts when it comes to those key metrics. Migration test. So that will probably be the very last piece that we customers usually start testing and start working around, right? So the migration test is how long does it take, right? That's when you start working on a production like, and you start testing it end to end, right? So you want to understand what the migration test looks like, right? What is your downtime on-prem looks like. That would really play a big role in how you set up your migration test and your database migration, right? Um, does it does your database allow or your application allow 5 hours downtime? Do you need CDC, change data capture? Do you need to use the DMS? If you have requirements that is zero downtime or close to zero downtime, then you might start have to look at the DMS and CDC. DMS is our migration service. The data migration service plus CDC allows you to hook it up. It migrates your data and it migrates your CDC, which is the change data capture. So that when the time comes, you can flip the switch and just a matter of failing over from one on-prem to the AWS. So that's like a few seconds of downtime. If 5 hours, 6 hours, whatever it is, and you are more comfortable using native backups, that is allowed. You can leverage the S3 bucket, you move your backup and you store. So you do have to have those tests. Do have those tests and timing documented. So when the time comes, you know exactly how long it takes, you know what the steps are, uh, and you can just go ahead and execute that. You don't want to be struggling when the time comes on Saturday or Sunday and you have 5 hours and something comes up. Test it
Going to
different
impact your
time.
RTO for sure.
It
That
does
RTO is
impact
going to,
your, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, there you go. And
Because
when
what
you,
is it? RPO is like a checkpoint when you're playing a video game and you want to go back to that point. You don't want to go back to the very beginning. And then
yeah,
your RTO is,
time objective.
let's say you're playing a driving game. Okay, I won't name one, but we'll say you're playing a driving game, and then you crash into the gas station, and you're like, oh shoot, I don't want to go back to the very beginning. And how fast you can get
You didn't
to
put a
that
lot of
gas
thoughts
station.
into this,
No,
apparently.
yeah, no, there's a whole lot of thought. So
Yeah,
then it's like the RTO is how fast you can get back to the gas station and hopefully
there you go.
pass it this time.
Yep. Yeah. 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 That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Yeah. So definitely, it's important to know what your RTOs are and RPOs are. It's it's very important. Um, as I was saying, just test on production, full production, not a subset, and validate. And once you do the migration, you want to make sure that you're validating everything you went through, right? Uh, not as much as going deep into the testing, but you want to make sure that you're not forgetting anything, right? It's always good to have a good migration plan and with a good quick testing plan. Not all the steps, but you want to make sure that once you do a migration, you go and test few pieces that application is up and running. All right. You don't want to be forgetting a piece, like you're moving your database, but you forget your SSL, or you move your database, but you forget your DNS, right? Make sure once you do the migration test, you do it end to end. Don't forget any piece. So your database is there, your application can connect, so everything works. So at the end of the day, when the time comes, you just flip the switch and it's up and running. And as I said, repeat, document it, repeat, and try to close the gaps, try to understand what you missed, what not, and all that. So you end up with a great migration book, and that just you just have to do once, and it will be done. As I said, this is the sample that we talked about. So you can use that sample to kind of like score your migrate your testing, your criterias. You set up your criterias, you set your descriptions, and you put your scores, right? So this is just a sample doc. You can go ahead and add, delete, or change, especially when it comes to the criteria level, and maybe 1, 2, 3 for us, but it maybe 1 to 5 for you, maybe to 1 to 10. So do have that, but this is could be handy because that gives you a quick uh, guide into how things works and how did they go in POC and what you need to improve on and what is okay to go with at the beginning to the cloud, and then you can work on it. Maybe later, maybe scalability, maybe you decide, you know what, scalability is medium, it's 2, it's okay to have this, but once we go to production, we're going to improve on that. Maybe performance is like, I am okay with being 2 at this point, and once we go, we start improving by doing changes or rewriting or recoding. So this is your call. This is not something that the partner can help with. uh, Partner can of course be part of that, but it's your call, it's the customer call to determine what works for them, what is the POC, and what is called a successful POC. So take advantage of that. And there's some samples of how do we go about, you click on pass and what's, the different modules that we test. So just a sample doc, take advantage of it and use it. And that will take us to the end of our presentation. This is our, as Wesley said, this is our SI partner email. If you have any questions about partners, how to leverage a partner, partner opportunities, please reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you. Do we have any questions?
No, I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anyone does have questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. Wesley, Bachar, thank you so much for leading us through the fourth and final episode or final session of our What's New with Amazon Aurora Day. This has been amazing. I've learned so much from all of you, and I hope
Great.
everyone else has. Brian, what do you think?
I think this is awesome. I've learned a lot too, especially from we're serverless to now we just talked about partners, and this is great. And there's an opportunity to win $500 in AWS
100.
credits.
100.
Yeah, 500. Yeah, I don't want to say 5,000 because I have to get less.
No.
Right?
You have an extra zero there somehow. $500, you're eligible. So sign up. Go to, let me go ahead and pull it up here. New with Amazon Aurora.splashthat.com. Make sure to register by July 1st. And then you are eligible for $500 of AWS credits. And think about what you might spend those on. Maybe using the fault injection simulator, or maybe invoking some chaos testing, or just testing in general, testing and building, and have fun. Remove the cost restraint and cost constraint there from you. Let's go ahead and let me do this. Okay, there we are. All 4 of us are back up. Thank you so much, Bachar. Thank you,
Thank
Wesley,
you.
for joining in.
Thanks
It's
for having
been
me.
wonderful having you here. And yeah, for each of you who are learning to or wanting to learn more, in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from yesterday, we have a brand new summit coming up. It's the New York Summit. And
Yeah.
what was that trigger word for me, Brian? What was free? My trigger
Free.
word's free. Yeah, this summit is free. So if you're looking for an in-person event, you can go ahead and register for the New York Summit at the Javits Center on July 12th. So looking forward to seeing each of you there in person. Feel free to stop by at the on-air booth and give us all a high five, or an elbow, or a 6 foot away high five, whatever your preference is. And we're here for you. But take care, enjoy, and thank you for tuning in. From all of us here at AWS On Air, we just spent an entire day talking about what's new with Amazon Aurora. Bye.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
Thank you.